Building resilience in Vermont's composting community. And yes, thanks for everyone's patience with the technological difficulty. And thank you, Michael, for saving the day with your hotspot. I'm going to let James introduce himself. He said that's part of his slides, but otherwise I'll moderate the session. And the next thing is lunch, which we have an hour and a half for. So Natasha said if we want to end up going a little bit late, if the discussion is being good, we don't need to cut off exactly at the designated end. So, take it away.
Okay.
Thanks so much, James.
All right, everybody. Hi. Thanks for joining and thanks for the patience with the technology. I will start this by saying this is sort of an experimental topic, I would say, for me. I usually talk about compost science and systems and that sort of thing. And have been for many years. And so, but I proposed this idea to Natasha, and we had some back and forth, and kind of came up with this idea of the topic being resilience in Vermont's composting community, which seems perfect for this conference in particular. And exactly what resilience means, I think, is maybe part of the discovery process of the presentation today. I think compost and composting is a resiliency process, right? It truly is this process of cycling from dead things to living things. And I wanted to share a poem, a haiku actually by my close friend Renee Wallace, who is in Detroit. She texted her haiku to me this morning. Just composting is love, one thing makes another thing, so life is sustained, right? And so this is the meaning, I suppose, in a way of resiliency, and so far beyond that. And this haiku was given to her in one of her communions with God. So she was sort of gifted this haiku to share, and I really love it, and it's been growing on me. So just a little bit about me. I grew up in Worcester, Vermont, which is not far from here. I live in the Boston area now, but my heart is in these mountains and hills, for sure. I spent a good amount of time at the Highfield Center for Composting, which is no longer, sadly, hasn't been for a long time. But I think Josh Kelly mentioned it this morning. Like, a lot of composting folks in Vermont and elsewhere kind of came through this nonprofit that existed many years ago, and I was able to. I just wanted to share a personal moment for me, which was that I was able to bring together my permaculture mentor from college, and my composting mentor, Tom Gilbert, who is at Black Dirt Farm, but used to be the director of Highfield Center for Composting. And we made this really cool video about Black Dirt Farm, and you can check it out. It's on YouTube. Andrew Millison he does permaculture videos around the world. And so if you Google Black Dirt Farm and Andrew Millison, you'll find this awesome short video that we put together. So that was just like a different kind of loop closing for me, as was another interesting that Deb Nair shared with me, where she connected with my agroecology teacher at the Land Institute, Tim Cruz. So that was like these moments that you have in your life where these loops close, and it's like, dang, what's going on? Anyhow, I wrote this book. Some of you have probably come across, this was the manuscript going into Chelsea Green Publishing in 2017. So this came out in 2019. I have the 131 School of Composting. I do consulting. There's a number of trainings that are offered through my consulting work and through the 131 School of Composting. And you saw this picture earlier in Michael's presentation. The Cultivating Community Composting network is hugely influential on me, and so it's just in the work that I do. Building connections, and I think so. That's just and this was my compost pile yesterday morning, so that was cool. This is my composting system, and here's just a little short video of my son turning our compost pile. This was like several years ago. But so this is just a little bit about me. This is my backyard bin system. I also have a tumbler, and this is like a walking bin system that you can kind of like move these little pieces and turn it into itself. So that's fun. Oops. So this talk today kind of comes out of some work that I did in Rhode Island. I was contracted by a funder to do a policy assessment of composting in Rhode Island. And in Rhode Island, there's really has been like one food scrap composter, and they don't even really compost mixed food scraps. They compost like residuals on a very large scale, but composting, Rhode Island's just very, very far behind what's happened here in Vermont for whatever reason. And so I sort of developed a process to look at policy and sort of the whole system down there that's impacting this. And through that, sort of made a study of like what impacts composting, what helps make it successful, what are barriers, opportunities, that sort of thing. My background in Vermont's composting community was extremely informative, and in many ways was sort of a model for sort of how I think about how composting works. I also wanted to mention like Austria has an enormous, like Vermont's kind of like, to me, like America's Austria, if that makes sense. We have, in Austria they have like probably over a 70% diversion rate on 300 farms around the country. And sort of along the same timeline as Vermont in a lot of ways. And I was super psyched to hear, Alyssa, like 54% diversion rate, like that's amazing. And I don't think that we necessarily I've been wanting that number. Like where are we at as just like as a sort of a feedback mechanism, because there was a journal article in Science, I think it was last year, that basically said that the food waste bans, of all the food waste bans in the country, Massachusetts was the only one that actually was increasing diversion. And I was like, that doesn't make sense. Sorry for anyone who's listening in Massachusetts right now. It's awesome that there's been a lot of success there, but I know that there's been success in other places too. So if you look back to 2012, what the diversion rate was here, I know it wasn't 54%, right? So that's something to really feel good about. Back to sort of this idea of resiliency, you know, I truly believe that the diversity, the partnerships, the community, and the institutional support are all critical factors for the success here in Vermont, and there also happen to be key factors in resiliency. So in Rhode Island, I had months to sort of look at all these factors and research them, and had lots and lots and lots of conversations. Today we've got about an hour, so I'm gonna kind of like move through some topics and hopefully invite some discussion. That's the goal. And now it's sort of a like, we've come a long way. I mean, I've been working in composting in Vermont for 15 years. It's like, but I feel like it's a time to check in about where we are, you know? I'm just like, had a few conversations today of just like looking around the room and trying to get a vibe check a little bit. You know, this is annual CO2 increase. And supposedly this was a graph that was not really broadcast, but you can see 2024, like this huge jump, which was, you know, so, you know, that was just one thing that came to mind. It was like, where are we? It's, oh boy, that's not good news. And at the same time, I think about, you know, what happened in LA, what's been happening here in Vermont year after year with these floods. It's like, it's heartbreaking, you know? But maybe that is gonna cause more people to turn back to the things that really matter. Think about where our food comes from. Think about where our water, those critical resources. This is a little booklet that was put out by George Washington Carver in 1916. So around 110 years ago, they were thinking about, you know, what shall we do for fertilizers, right? That he talks about the cost of fertilizer, nitrate of soda, cottonseed, and this ultimately, what he talks about here is, well, actually, it's right here in my book. In the beginning, it says, when to make the compost. This is from George Washington Carver. Begin your compost heap now. Do not delay. Let every spare moment be put in the woods, raking up leaves, or in the swamps, pulling up muck. And so, you know, I'm not saying that literally, but, you know, this is the resource. He's talking about finding the local resources, valuing them, putting that into the soil. And, you know, in geologic time, in the timeline of our Earth, 110 years is not that long. Just another milestone for me. I don't know if anyone's come across this cartoon called Common Side Effects. It's on HBO right now. It's about a mushroom that like cures everything. And if you paid attention closely, you may have noticed Vermont Compost Company. This mycologist is buying a little bag of Compost Plus.
What did Carl think of that?
I texted it to him. I didn't hear back, so I don't know. I'm like, either they have amazing, I don't know. It's just a niche thing. I honestly don't think they had anything to do with it, but anyway, hilarious. So the goals for this discussion, you know, are bridging topics, gaps, opportunities, celebrating the strengths in Vermont's composting community, looking to the future, and also honoring being back in person, although I realized there was some in person last year that I missed, so I apologize for that. And this is what I'm getting to, is I'm calling this the compost ecosystem matrix, for lack of, but it's basically a report card. And it's a list of 30 things. And these are all things that I've like sort of parsed and really brainstormed and spent time thinking about. Like, you know, if all these things, I realize the color is kind of bad here, but If all these things are kind of working well, or more of these things are working well, it's supporting an ecosystem of thriving organics, recycling. And so I wanted to give folks a second just to look at this. There's the three categories: people, resources, and the environment. And that's sort of the environment that composting is happening within. Take a minute to look at this, and what we're gonna do is an exercise where I'm gonna sort of poll the group using phones, and we're gonna kind of look at like, okay, what areas within people are progressing the best? What are the most challenging? What are, what's not clear or sort of lukewarm, moderate? And what we might do is just do like the people one, and then maybe open it up for discussion. I'm kind of hoping to invite some discussion about like, what's working well, what's not, and see where the conversation sort of takes us. So while I'm pulling that, yeah, that's right. I do have my polling. That's right, okay. Kind of losing track here. But while I'm pulling up the poll, maybe if you all can take a minute to think about why composting. Michael and I were, the same question, right? Why compost? Why composting? Like, what is it for you, And take a minute, and that'll be sort of the first question in the poll is like 1 or 2 words. Why composting for you? And actually, will you just turn to your neighbor and share those words? You will in a second. Yeah. But first, just to break the silence for a minute. Introduce yourself. Okay, so once you're ready to wrap up your conversation, here's what you're going to do. You're going to get out your phone, and you're going to text this number, 22333, and it's kind of hard to see, but you're going to text. The message is going to be James McSween 113. So you're going to text 22333, and the message is going to be James McSween 113. All right, did people get that? Okay, cool. All right, and now you're gonna text in 1 or 2 words, like, what's your why? Nutrients, sustainable. closed loop systems, nutrient cycling, sustainable. All right, they're starting to come in. This is good. I don't know how much overlap there's going to be. Earth. Ooh. Waste. Ooh. Waste is the one coming up. All right. There's community. All right. And you can only do one response per person. So waste and community is coming up. Oh, interesting. Okay. Earth, regenerative, responsibility. So yeah, before we jumped into sort of like the what and the who and the how and the where and all that, I feel like it's important to ground this in sort of the why for us. And we're all going to have different whys. Like that's just the reality. It's really going to be unique to each person. And yeah, I mean, for me, the thing that I keep coming back to is, how can I be in right relationship, with the earth, with people, and I think composting is a really powerful way to do both. So let's jump to the next one if we can. Here we go. Okay, so I apologize, it's a little weird because you're not going to be able to see all of these simultaneously, but I'll kind of scroll up and down and you can take a minute. So what you're going to do is you're going to, so the question is, under the category of people, which of the following areas are progressing best? And you have, you'll type in the letter A, B, C. I realize it's going to be hard to sort of pick one, but I'll read them out loud. So racial and socioeconomic diversity and equity in composting, motivated composters, motivated haulers, food scrap generator participation, demand by end users, amicable neighbors, supportive communities, supportive regulators, supportive lawmakers, grassroots advocacy. And we're going to do what's working best, what's working worst, what's sort of neutral, and then we'll kind of come to sort of what the priority area is for folks.
Can you scroll up again?
Yep. Yeah. Let's see, there's probably a place where it can say what the response rate. It doesn't tell me how many people, does it? How many people need more time? People good? Okay, that's great. All right, so we got 36% motivated composters, 36% demand by end users, 9, 9, and 9, supportive communities, supportive regulators, and supportive lawmakers. That's great. Okay. So I'm just going to make a quick note for myself of this. So we got 5. Okay. All right, let's try the next one, which is, which of these areas is most challenging? right, do people need another minute? All right, looks like food scrap generator participation is the highest, and then racial socioeconomic diversity, equity, and composting. Supportive regulators, supportive lawmakers, and amicable neighbors are all there, but a little bit lower. Okay. Great. Okay. Now, starting to already get a clear picture, but any sort of, I guess, any that you're strongly sort of unclear, I guess, you know. Let's use this one for mainly unclear.
How would you differentiate amicable neighbors and supportive communities?
It's a really, I mean, I think amicable neighbors is like, how bad is NIMBYism in, you know? Yeah. And do people need another minute?
Can you scroll down again, please?
Yep. Okay, are people good? Motivated haulers. Okay, so we're giving motivated haulers in the middle somewhere or unclear. Grassroots advocacy is neutral / unclear. Okay. Okay. Well, that sort of worked. If I would love to just bring this into a sort of an open dialogue, and before I do that, I guess I'm wondering, this next one is sort of which would be most helpful or would you be most interested in discussing? All right, I'll give folks one more minute. And I guess, I don't know, let's not limit the conversation to these topics, but like, I guess for me, the way I'd like to open the discussion is like, where are we at, and what might the future look like? And let's start with food scrap generation. If folks have a sense, and I don't, let me just take another quick poll. How many folks in the room are directly either collecting food scraps or managing food scraps in some physical way? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Okay. Yeah. I guess what's the sense of where we're at with when it comes to generator participation? Anybody have it? Yeah.
Yeah. So hi, I'm Shannon with the Vermont DEC. I've had 2 instances come up recently that sort of highlight that I think generally Vermonters want to participate in composting, but they feel there are a variety of barriers. One instance was a woman reaching out saying that her composter rejected her material because of contamination. And so there's a lack of education. I think, you know, we see studies based off of like battery recycling that, you know, in that study they said people want to hear information directly from their haulers. And so if they're not receiving clear information from their haulers and then they're getting material rejected, it becomes a barrier of what am I even doing? What am I supposed to do? And so, you know, in that moment I made a comment about seeking out newsletters, following their waste district on Facebook. Those weren't acceptable options for the person. They wanted their hauler to tell them before the consequence. And so there's definitely, in that sense, she wanted to participate and reach that barrier and was questioning what she should do from there. Another instance was someone reaching out, sharing some feedback about the cost of drop-off services. I mean, we all recognize that composting food scraps requires infrastructure, you know, operations, maintenance equipment, staff labor, and, you know, obviously there are the options for those decentralized, smaller systems, but where this person was living in Vermont, it's often you go to a drop-off and that gets hauled away to a compost facility, and so there's fees associated with that, and she felt very strongly that if something is mandated, that it should be free of charge, that she should not have to pay, and so there is that financial barrier as well. I think in general, that showed me that people want to participate and need a better understanding of how the system works in order to understand where their money is going and why maybe they might not get compost for free afterwards, like maybe they think it might work out. And then clarity around contamination issues. And again, that education coming directly from haulers, which, I mean, obviously my role is education. I would love that for them just to like, be like, what you say is good enough and I'll seek out information from you. But she was very adamant. Her hauler should be doing that for her.
Interesting. Okay. Versus hearing it from you?
Versus hearing it from me, versus following her solid waste district on Facebook to get those up-to-date policy changes. I mean, this is an instance where I don't think the district was actually the one, like she needed to reach out to the hauler and say, what is your contamination policy? But then she sort of got the run around and ended up on the phone with me. And I actually was like, well, we can look at Green Mountain's contamination policy, but you need to reach out to your hauler and make sure they're bringing their material there, because your hauler might still have something different to say than what this document says online. And so there is a lot of confusion about what is accepted and what is not,
Okay.
and why compostables aren't accepted and all of that.
Are there haulers in this stuff? Right now, I'm just curious if you have that perspective.
Yep, so, yeah, any like thoughts off of what Shannon was just sharing? Like general agreement, similar experiences? Yeah.
So I work at Green Mountain Compost in Williston, and that is, we just rolled out a contamination policy that went into effect last July. That is one of the hardest topics that we're trying to navigate, is that kind of barrier that we have in educating the end customer on the specifics of what we accept between the hauler. So we can give the hauler all of the advice. They're the ones getting the contamination fine if they have contamination in their loads, but it's what they do with that information to then go to their constituents with. So that is a huge barrier. But I don't think that it's impossible to navigate. I think we just need more open lines of communication. So for instance, I think one of the benefits of our contamination policy is that it is opening dialogue with our haulers, which we did not have prior to that. So we're now able to pinpoint specific contaminants, go to the hauler and say, we've got all this documentation that it's actually still coming in. Here's some ideas about how you can go and educate your customers, but again, it's on them to kind of do that. And we've been open. I know Joey's over here kind of shaking his head a little in terms of the need for a better relationship with the haulers to kind of get that information out. But, yeah.
Would it be a fair summary to say, like, we're kind of like I mean, maybe this has been true for a while, but that the low-hanging fruit of people who want to compost and who are like easily sort of maybe rule followers, or like that they've been composting for a while, and if we're at a 54% diversion rate, like we're kind of like, I mean, I remember in the early waste characterization studies, I feel like they estimated something in the realm of maybe 65% diversion was possible, was the idea, and that we're in that final sliver of folks who are gonna, I mean, not that that is the limit, but like that maybe the limit will change, and that I'm just sort of like trying to wrap my head around, okay, what does this mean about where we're at? You know, it does seem like there's been enormous success, and now the strategies are we're gonna have to pivot. We're gonna have to kind of rethink, you know, how to reach these people, what resources that's gonna take. Is that sort of, yeah.
I think that's exactly right. Like, especially when you're thinking about barriers, it's really easy to pinpoint the obvious ones, like the people who simply like cannot afford to have curbside, or the people who live in parts of the state where curbside pickup is not an option. But the people who like probably know about it at this point, do have access to curbside and other collections, have the means to afford it, and still aren't doing it. Like, those are the conversations that I feel like, at least in my perspective, my position, I feel like I would love to start really having. Like, I have a family member like lives in South Burlington in a nice neighborhood, has the means, and they're not doing it. They could backyard compost, they don't. And I haven't had the awkward conversation with them because it's family, but I sort of want to, because I'm just like, what are your barriers? Like, do you just not care? I don't know. But those are just really big challenges.
So yeah. I'm Joey Kenya. I'm at Chittenden Solid Waste District. I'm the compliance and safety person. So what we're doing is trying to focus on a more compliance-focused approach to get generators, especially restaurants right now. And it is a very labor-intensive, hands-on approach, even to get one restaurant from, like, no, we're not going to compost, to, like, well, now you're going to go through this whole long process with us until you get to doing it, and we sign off on you're actually following the rules now. We're trying to figure out how to streamline that, but that's what we're trying to do, and it's very labor-intensive. On the other side, with, like, landlords and apartments, that's like another entity we're trying to look at, and we just we went to 100 apartment complexes in the county, and I think it was like 35% had no evidence of composting. So that's our next kind of thing. It's like just trying to get data and figure out who's not doing what, and then targeting those messages. But yeah, there is a lot of participation, but there's also just, like, my goal that I keep saying is we're trying to find the people who are at zero and get them to, like, some percentage.
Yeah.
But it's very labor intensive.
Interesting.
Yeah, and that I think comes back to the whole, socioeconomic, the conversation of renters. I mean, studies do show that renters in comparison to homeowners feel like they don't have access to information, don't have access to services. I forget what study said this, but what I took away from that was, our village populations and our more urban spaces that, these populations probably feel like this is a little bit more out of reach than what I'm accustomed to. And I think what you mentioned is really interesting where, you said it's a family member, and I have come across this too, where I'm at a friend's house and they're throwing things away, and I'm just like, oh God, how do I talk about this very personal decision that this person is making, that they have decided works out best for them for whatever reason, even if the decision isn't really thoughtful, maybe they haven't actually thought about it, and they're just like, this is what I'm used to. But waste is very personal, and which is odd because this is food scraps, it's a resource. And so it's like, it's hard to have these conversations one-on-one without making someone feel like I'm judging you for not making the choice that I'm talking to you about, because obviously if I'm talking to you about it, I think you should be doing it. And if you're not, like, I wanna know why. That is a very difficult conversation to have one-on-one. And so I think, yeah, some type of like a focus group of people who live in those more urban settings, you know, and what is it that makes it so they can't participate. And I think the big thing again is, yeah, landlords. It's not always the food scrap generator who's not participating, it may be the landlord and the food scrap rent tenant, the food scrap tenant, yeah. They probably be like, I wanna see this. And sometimes we get feedback, like we get complaints at the DEC of, I don't have composting at my apartment. And actually we aren't able to enforce on landlords providing that. So, at least on the DEC level, there are different ordinances in different regions of the state. Yeah.
Let me ask you this. So, like, getting onto the sort of the separate topic. So, racial and socioeconomic diversity and equity in composting, and then sort of like the other side of that is accessibility. You know, and I guess yeah, I mean, how much of it is accessibility? It sounds like accessibility is a big part of, a big barrier in terms of, you know, generation, working with generators. Yeah.
I'm Deb Neer, and I've worked at UVM for a while. I'm going to speak as just a personal resident of Burlington, okay, rather than that, because, and I guess, I feel like I'm just thinking about what Michael said today in terms of no shame, no guilt issues about somehow we need to build in incentives rather than a stick. And financial piece is something people do respond to. And that was one, I know, I'm a composter, I am a big advocate of it, but when I'm having to I've gotten my trash down to one small bag a week, but I don't get any, you know, discount on that, where I've got 3 times that amount of food waste, but I gotta pay extra. You know, it feels like I don't get any reward. In fact, I felt like I got punished almost for taking the effort and time to put it into food. You know, it's kind of like, I thought there was a trade-off and I might be able to save a little bit, you know, or you get a discount for doing something good, and if you violate that, maybe the discount gets taken away. In a way, like you know, it's kind of like innocent until proven guilty.
Can I ask who's your hauler in Burlington then?
I'm gonna just stay anonymous.
Okay. I only say that because there are haulers and there are options that would make sense. So like if you are.
Because I went around decisions and I called a lot of people, so I got a lot of different perspectives.
Yeah.
I don't want to.
But I completely agree. Like my
I'm just
thinking
saying
about all
that.
this is how do I lower every barrier possible, and finance is the biggest one. And
Yeah.
so.
I'll just give an example. I mean, I was a speaker at Cal Poly in California about 10, 15 years ago or so. And we went in and we were learning about a program Santa Barbara had. And we went into the restaurants and showed where they were dumping their food waste and stuff. And they talked about a program that they get a discount on their waste removal if they comply. But they have 3 chances. And if you get, you know, that discount goes away if you exceed your three strikes, you're out kind of thing. But I thought, wow, that's definitely an incentive. And then I took a little, they gave away these little jars with some compost in it that they had set in restaurants and say, this is what your food waste can be, you know, and you open it and it smells like soil. It smells good, you know. So I thought that was kind of cool. I don't know if they still do it or not, but I thought it seemed like it was a little bit more on the carrot side. But it does take a lot of time to go through that and see if there is contamination.
I think with the universal recycling law, like one component of that is the unit-based pricing for trash. So if you
Yeah.
self-haul, you pay by the bag. But it's kind of almost a loophole if you have like curbside. And I mean, it's certainly true at my house as well. Like we do curbside and the trash is weekly collection.
Yeah, I'm
And it's
curbside.
just the big bin and we barely fill it unless we have house construction projects going on, in which case then we appreciate
And
it.
it's built into my taxes.
Right, and well, ours is not, I mean, it's just a
Okay.
separate, like, we just decided we have little kids and we were taking the convenience over the cost. But you're right, diverting the recycling and the food scraps does not lower the trash. But it would if we were taking it to a bag drop and then we just paid for the bag that we
Yeah,
actually
no, that's a
generated.
good point to distinguish between the two
Yeah.
systems, so there's different systems.
Right. As
Yeah.
customers, we get to choose, but there's, as you said, there's so many factors in what makes sense for your individual situation.
Yeah, and not to like point out one specific hauler, but they're, I'm forgetting their name, I think it was like Curb Waste or something. They are offering a pay-as-you-throw trash collection service where, and I just saw an article about them, a monthly fee for recycling and compost, and then it's by the bag. And so you do see that incentive for less trash produced. And it is what we want to see, and it's
Yeah.
great to see a hauler taking up that method of a business model. And so they are based out of Burlington, and I think their name is Curb Waste, I'm sorry.
Curb
Like,
Yep. The resource.
Curb, yes, I knew the Curb was.
Well, there's so many differences, you know, it's like, how do you go shopping for the best hauler? And I see like 3 or 4 different haulers going in front of my house, you know, on a weekly basis.
Alyssa, I don't know if you know the answer to this, but do you have a sense of like how much of the wasted food is in the residential versus commercial sector at this point?
So the waste comp study did break out the two. It was honestly pretty similar, but
Okay.
the data that I showed was aggregate.
Was aggregate, okay.
But actually, if you have your laptop, we could easily pull it up and get the actual answer.
Okay, yeah, but it sounds like it's comparable.
It's pretty
Okay,
similar.
okay. All right, well, let's pull the next area, which is resources. I can get.
Do you also have data by county?
Unfortunately, we don't. Yeah, I know it was statewide. Oh, for the diversion side, right, we have that facility. You mean even for the waste comp?
Yeah, or even for waste comp, you could look at where the source at.
You could, I don't know. Yeah, because the whole, like the totals are all just really extrapolated. Yep. So, I don't.
You know, I'm just gonna wear a hat of, I taught compost ecology at University of Vermont, and we did a waste audit, waste sort over in the student center, and it was a super eye-opener for the students. They couldn't believe how much contamination. So it's back to, I think what Michael was saying, you gotta get your hands in it. And when you start to see it and witness it, and then they were like, well, we have these compostable things, why can't we put it there? And it's like, well, because UVM has a reputation of sending all this contaminated stuff to Green Mountain, you know?
Everyone.
And so, you know, but it brought up the conversation, you know?
Yeah,
And,
it's tangible, that tangibility of the problem.
They were seeing one of their solutions, they thought, because every dining hall and residence hall had a different system on how to sort. And they're like, well, first of all, couldn't we get consistency across even just one campus? And then they were suggesting students should be monitoring this, so it's like a peer. You know, I thought that was interesting, but it would take some coordination. But that bubbled up from them.
All right, so this next section is resources. And so this is a poll of what areas are progressing well. Access to viable land, access to organic materials, which is sort of the generator question too, but beyond that. Funding opportunities, capacity to acquire funding, capital investment, operating capital, training for composters, training for generators, education for end users, access to technical assistance.
Can you scroll up again?
Yep.
A lot of choices.
I know, it's a lot of choices and it's a little awkward the way it's set up. All right, folks, good? All right. Okay, and then I'm gonna, so it's training. It's progressing well. Good, yeah. Training for composters is good. That's good. That's what I would think too. Access to organic materials. Education for end users, access to technical assistance, both decent. All right. So that was progressing well. This is what's most challenging. Everyone good? Okay. So our top one is capital. The top ones are capital investment and training for generators. Then we've got access to technical assistance. Talk to me about that one. We do have access to technical assistance, at least for composters. Let's see.
Anyone mind if I turn this down from 78?
It's hot in here, isn't it? Woo!
It's down about 10 degrees.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's gonna be.
Capacity to acquire funding.
I wonder if it felt like we were cooking.
Yeah. Funding opportunities. Okay.
Can you open that door? Is it too noisy? Just to get some air flow?
Try it, let me know if their door is shut.
I'm gonna skip the neutral or unclear one and just jump ahead to what we'd be most interested in discussing. So go ahead. This is all the same resource topics. Give you 10, 15 more seconds. All right. Looks like the generator thing is the hot topic. And then behind that is funding opportunities. So let's jump over to a discussion about training for generators and funding opportunities. Yeah, where are we at in terms of training for generators?
I guess I'll speak. Hi, I'm Emily from Addison County Solid Waste Management District. I'm the outreach coordinator. One of our biggest issues currently is our private composting operation that we work with to take in most of the food waste in our area has recently, last summer, decided a lot of things that they used to accept in their compost system are no longer accepted. Largely compostable plastics, bioplastics, biobags, anything of that nature. So it almost feels like we are currently undergoing a re-education process of every single generator of food waste in our area, just to ensure that they are not contaminating the compost system with compostable items.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that's a familiar one to a
Yeah.
lot of some of the largest composters in areas in the country right now, is this shift.
Can I ask you, on the, sorry, Andy from Bear Valley. I wonder, like, you had a lot of different sources coming in. I mean, were they decentralized enough that there were different systems and different collecting requirements for different locations, or was it sort of unified across all of the different sites? Like, how did you manage the training of generators of composting on that scale?
Yeah, so a lot of it is our staff that have gone through a series of different trainings, from like the virtual of ILSR to James's course to the hands-on, like hand-holding and actually building files. But I think as far as like feedstock storage, feedstock receiving, that's a whole nother conversation that we need to be in consideration, specifically in like parks where there is wildlife, where there is like, already a lot of activity there, and being mindful of primarily like the putrescible food scraps, less of mulch, sawdust, etc. But it's kind of like very much case by case. It's not a universal blanket. It's not a one size fits all. Everything has its own unique situation. Obviously, the NIMBYism if you're in like a very saturated residential area. But it's a balance of trainings that exist, and then learning by doing, and then kind of establishing the best management practices per region, case by case.
Another question. Does anyone have a sense of like the percentage of schools that are composting in Vermont right now?
That's what they're talking about.
Yeah, I know. I was thinking about them over there, and
Pretty high.
it's
There's
pretty
some
high.
areas we know where they need some help.
There's some areas.
They may have started, and then there's been backsliding. COVID, we lost some schools definitely, in terms of, they had good programs, and then, everything just kind of went into blank. But,
I remember with one a
Pretty
couple
strong,
years
yeah.
ago that had not been diverting food scraps at all, but they came into compliance really quickly. And I'm about to visit a really small school in the Northeast Kingdom that has never diverted food scraps. And so I'm gonna go there in a couple of weeks, and hopefully.
Yeah.
Her response was like, yeah, maybe we can at least start with the snacks. I'm like, snack waste, that's not where
But like Chittenden, like
it is,
Yeah.
schools are tough.
schools are tough. Yeah, interesting.
We're getting all the waste in from the haulers. It's really hard to pinpoint where exactly it's coming from. When we do pinpoint where it's coming from, the haulers are able to pass along a fine if they have a contaminated load, which we do have a pocket of a school system that is consistently contaminated, and those fines are not changing any behavior. So now it's kind of making us reshift. We don't want, the last thing we want to be doing is fine people. Like, I cannot stand sending out fines. It's not a fun thing to do. That's not why I got into this. But, so like this pocket of schools, we now need to sit back. I don't want to keep finding these people. We have been into the schools and talked, but it's such a hard, like, it's so hard. Those sort stations, there's one teacher maybe on staff. They're so tired. The last thing that they have time to do is police the sort station. So I think maybe if, I don't know, this is me, I'm not in the schools, I'm a composter, but like, if we could somehow create some sort of a system of, this is the sort system that should go into every school, or I don't know, where information, because they're still learning about the process at that age, and kind of having I guess I'll take it, the UVM Med Center was, they're kind of a success story in my opinion. They, once we stopped accepting compostable products, they did not want to comply with that. So I know Casella did a great job training them, and their sort station is awesome. So they will give it to, like the tray will go through a window, and there's someone who knows. So it gives it to one person to be trained, whereas you're at a school that's hundreds of kids. It's not set up for success, and so that's something that I think that we need to kind of go back and kind of refocus on kind of front of house or back of house, front of house training.
I just called it back of house sorting. I don't know what it's called, but
So, DEC received funding from the EPA to do a school material management institute that we're not calling that, we're calling it the School Compost and Recycling Action Plan. Institute, scrappy. So, it is the first time we're doing this with the goal is that schools will be writing an individualized action plan amongst a team of, teachers, nutrition, chef people, students, principals, and with that team, bring that plan back to their school and implement it over the course of the school year. A lot of the feedback we got in the application process was, thinking about we need a sort station. And so I would love to see one of the schools use the funding. They're each getting $3,500. It may very well cost about that to have a metal sorting station fabricated. I don't really know the costs. But I was very glad to see that as one of the focus areas for one of the schools. But a lot of them did mention that, we're composting, we're not doing it as well as we can. We need to get this down. We want to compost on site. And so, there was a lot of focus on food scrap management in that application, from the schools. And we got 16 applications. I don't know how many schools are in the state, but I'm like, hey, that's a small percentage. But it was really great to see the variety of where they feel like they're at. From the school that's like, we're throwing everything into the trash, and the one that's like, we want to incorporate our food scraps into feeding our chickens, and then take the chicken waste and compost that, and grow a garden with it, and feed the chickens again and again. And
Did you get an application that said they weren't diverting at all?
Yes.
You guys,
Yes.
I mean, they were open about it. That's
Yes,
good.
that was great. Yeah, I was just like, you are in. So,
Whereas the school that I'm working with didn't apply. I'm like, please apply for this program. And she didn't.
but that one is a very difficult one. I worked at that school when I was in the Northeast Kingdom.
Yeah.
They need to figure out a solution that they are, there are no haulers who are willing to pick up the food scraps out there. And so they really have a lot to figure out. And when I tried to set something up, I thought it happened until halfway through the school year. I learned it didn't. So that was fun.
I'm also curious, I'm not like the biggest fan of all the tech that's been coming out over the past few years, but like at least in LA we're inundated with requests of meal, loan, vitamins, food side, like every single one, right? And like a lot of them are doing well with multifamily and well-to-do areas and socioeconomic classes in the city. One thing I am doing is like leveraging them to subsidize schools. And the last thing I want to do is teach my kid to press a button and call it compost, because it's not. But it dehydrates and it grinds it and makes it stable to then feed worms. And then I can still have demos of tumblers, 3 bins, wire bins, Johnson C, whatever. But I do see a small niche in a chaotic, saturated, miscommunication entity, which is the tech industry, to support schools, at least from a staffing capacity, future liquid situation,
Like as funders or as technology providers?
as subsidized donated equipment.
Subsidized donated
Yeah.
equipment to kind of help start the
Jumpstart
process.
it.
Yeah.
Because for us, it's like we're going to bring a bus to a school, get them all excited, and they'd be like, so now what, right?
Yeah.
It's like a great documentary that you watch, but no action step on what to do because of the issue. And like for us, it's like we can't promise to compost at every school.
Mm-hmm.
We can bring the resources and other groups who can kind of take it to that next step. always been curious if, like, what role does this emerging sector that's not gonna go away play from the industry standpoint?
Yeah. Interesting question. I'm still curious. So in Chittenden, are 100% of schools composting?
I don't know that number.
Don't know. Yeah, I'm just kind of curious.
I know, so there's one, at Chicken Solid Waste, there's one school outreach education coordinator. And
Yeah.
her name is Recycle Rhonda, she's awesome.
Yeah.
But I think her school count, I don't know what 40 is on, like, the ones that she's visited yearly. But she's doing tours of our facility and goes directly to schools and does, like, what goes where for
Yeah.
all the products. And that's one of the things that she stated she brings back, anecdotal evidence of, like, just source stations are crazy.
Yeah.
It's hard at a school, like.
Yeah.
I'm almost like, oh, could there be just, like, school-only haulers?
Yeah.
Where it's like one hauler for all the schools in one area, and then they all contract with the hauler, and then the hauler goes like, sorry, that's just.
Well, I was just thinking, if
because-
you had that, then you
Yeah.
have a competition about who has the least contaminated food waste doing
I mean,
the school.
I just like my mind's going like, okay, well, it seems like at the school district level, there could be a commitment to compost. And then also just as a trajectory to kind of like improve overall generation 10 years from now, schools are the obvious place to invest. And, especially for, that non-low hanging fruit. And then I'm wondering, but I'm sort of like, is it training and education that needs to happen in schools, or are there a lot of schools that still just aren't even, it's not a lot of schools that aren't even composting, right? Like most of them are composting, but it's like now coming back in that continued education is that.
Well, I feel like, teachers get stretched so thin and they keep getting more things to do, not less. And
Right.
getting compensated less, so.
Yeah.
And it takes a champion, and the school's gonna have to value that and see
Yeah.
value and put some resource or have a person, they always have a person that knows something and cares about it to coordinate it.
Yeah.
And I don't.
That's what I get concerned, if you just start putting more on them, I mean.
Yeah, I had an interesting meeting when I started. I went with Rhonda to one of the school districts, and we sat down with a head of custodian, the head of like the environmental club, a teacher, and then the head of like purchasing. And just the amount of barriers, and they all were so motivated, and they are composting, but the amount of barriers that they were presenting to like get a good, solid, clean stream was very eye-opening. So like, kind of to what everyone's saying here, like even if you're motivated, there's so many factors that are putting up walls. Like one of them was, the kids are always gonna throw stuff in the compost, like containers and silverware and things like that. I was like, well, what if you got, non-reusable stuff? And the guy was like, I did that. I started with 3,000 plates. I ended the year with less than 1,000. I was like, what do you mean? They're just throwing away like regular plates? And he's like, yep. So like even logical things that like steps that you think, it was very eye-opening how challenging it was. And again, the teachers, there's one or two who are monitoring, 150 kids eating lunch, trying to not have fights happen or this, that, and the other. They can't be at the station. So it is an interesting barrier to try and figure that out.
Yeah.
I'm visiting a small school tomorrow as an outreach program manager in Bennington County, and the head of facilities has talked to me, and we're going to try to noodle what it is. I haven't been there yet, but he's dealing with just the vast quantity of food scraps that are thrown away with the offer versus serve program, in which kids just don't want to eat what's being given to them. And so we talked about, I haven't seen the share table, but he says he's doing share tables, but yet there's so much material that's just getting thrown in compost with never seen a mouth. And it's disheartening to him, and he's trying to figure out what he has to do to, curtail that. And so we're gonna find out, but I just wondered what other organizations are doing when they have that, to get material food that's tasty in front of kids, but also something they're gonna eat and consume, or find ways to divert it so it doesn't, for another human, rather than going straight to compost. So it is a challenge.
If people don't mind, I kind of want to share a success story from Baltimore. You mentioned the word champion, and I think that is huge. I think kids are going to be like the resource that gets us out of it. We talk about teachers being inundated with work and not enough finances and school systems in general. Yeah. In Baltimore, there was a group of kids, really started from just one kid, in a neighborhood where asthma was prevalent. There was already an incinerator there. And it was this one person who fought and got really the behavior change throughout the community, started with other kids, and they, attended these meetings and really, they sang songs, they did a lot, but they stopped the building of a new incinerator in the town. And I think this goes back to a lot of what you had said about like kids in urban areas needing to be shown the worms and shown the systems. It's that you're a product of your environment, and if you don't see the effect that throwing these plates and food in the trash has, then you're just never going to make that connection. So even in the technology space, in Baltimore, I heard from the founder of the mill, and he was saying how you get the technology in front of the people. I'm going on a tangent a little bit, but there's a lot of behavior change to be made just by showing people what the effect of their actions has. I think kids are a huge area to just push back on. So I think if you're in these huge school systems, my advice would just be to focus on one or two champions and try to get them to expand their work, because teachers don't have a lot of time, but these kids definitely do. Definitely curious. And I think for a lot of people in my generation, learning about climate change and how everything is tied together was sort of my impetus for joining this industry. So yeah, I think we're in a time where we want to shy away from talking about climate change and all that stuff, but I wouldn't shy away from it. I would try to make those connections with the kids especially, and then they can build that onto parents and teachers and communities. And yeah, don't have full thoughts, but just want to put that out there.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, the energy, there's a lot of energy in those schools, right? It's like, how do you catalyze that, and dealing with this at this phase of organics recycling, it's like easier said than done, right? Like to get over these humps, and dealing with issues that have been there for a long time. And, yeah, I mean, it's really, I had no idea where this conversation was going to go. But it makes sense because I've talked to composters in Vermont, and they're like, we need material, we actually need material. In some ways, it's a good problem to have because there's composting capacity. Like, there actually is composting capacity here, and that is not a small achievement. Like, most places are dealing with the opposite problem. Not enough capacity, a ton of people who would love to compost. Yeah.
I think one challenge I've noticed in Vermont is carbon. And, people have food waste and it's wet, and you gotta balance it with enough carbon. And I was dialoguing with, someone that was working at a community farm, and they're like, we really wanna compost, but we know we have a problem. It's too wet, it's too much nitrogen. I go, well, add some carbon. Well, where do we get the carbon?
Yeah.
And down the road is some biomass burning plant. There's a little competition sometimes against that.
Yeah.
If you want some of those wood chips and sources of carbon in your compost.
Yeah,
So I have found that to be a challenge
That's
here.
something I heard from restaurants when they're like, in the summertime, our staff, we can have the system, but it's disgusting because it's half a week's of food. And, I didn't have anything to offer them, but in my mind, I'm like, well, how do we get the haulers to offer, or what's the system that we could put in place to have, a bucket of leaves or coffee grounds next to their
Or some of
compost
those,
that
or
just
something.
put a scoop on at the end of the night, and then it's not gross the next day. But yeah, how do you, so that's kind of been in my head, because I've had a few people say that same thing.
To interject briefly, there's about 5 minutes officially left of the session. Lunch goes until 1:45, so like Natasha said, we're welcome to continue, but if you do want to be at the start of lunch, it is in Judd Hall, which is where we were this morning, and it officially starts, at 12:15.
let's take the next 5 minutes. I like one other question to ask is like, I mean, where we're going. We're sort of talking about it, but I'm kind of curious. Like, especially for those of you who have been doing this work for a while in Vermont, like, has your goalpost changed? Like, has where you wanted to go? Like, how close are you to that? And like, is it changing? I realize it's a very open question, but.
Ben, I'd love to hear your thoughts. You've been on this topic for a long time.
The goalpost changing or just in general?
Just in general, whatever you want.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just a lot of good discussion. I don't know that I have much else to add outside of kind of the things that have been brought up already. I did want to talk about the funding opportunities. I don't want to change that.
Do.
Excuse me. I think one of the big barriers that I see in Vermont, I work with the DEC and I do permitting for organics management facilities. And one of the big barriers that I see is funding opportunities for privates versus municipalities. So if it's a municipality owned and run system, then you have a lot of access to government and state funding. If it's a privately owned facility, even some of these small composters that just need a tractor or a screener or something simple to help them really improve their operation, there's no funding available or very limited, especially if they're not a farm. So that's one of the areas where I think there's a big gap where we could really do a lot of heavy lifting by making a relatively small amount of money available to private facilities. That was just
I would second that and say, yes, that's needed. We do have a private operation, and they have a couple of times over the years asked us for funding for their operation. We don't have that capacity, so any outside support to help their system become better and stronger would be really amazing, because they are taking in all of our food waste.
How are other states? Do they have the same problem?
Which problem?
Oh, the idea of the funding.
Oh, the funding? Oh, well, I mean,
Profits.
funding just changed, just dramatically.
Well, Vermont's doing it better, but does anybody have they been, anybody else done better?
A woman I met in composting school at Juneau Compost, and she's private, she's super tiny, amazing, she's doing such great things, but there's a municipality right next door, and they're just about to open up a composting business. She's trying to connect with them, but they're not getting her to yet. So if they start going, they're gonna
And
obviously.
there's competition.
Yeah, so they're gonna put her under, so I think, it's real, it's out there. I feel very lucky to work at Green Mountain Compost. It is a municipality, like, we are very lucky to have all of the access to equipment, and then we started I mean, we're huge, in terms of Vermont, but, it's something that's, I mean, we see all the time, there's small composters, their access to funding is just not there.
And we need all sizes.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I'm
In all
curious,
areas.
I'm just thinking in my brain, like, how do we bridge that gap of, like, there's municipalities that have all this funding, and can we, like, somehow create partnerships with those smaller, people? I don't know, I would not see why can't we create that as part of our program, that's part of our mission. Part of our mission is to be community-based, so, like, I don't know, just.
I think that's a really,
Starting a thought.
really good point. I mean, it definitely is happening. There are examples of that, of like municipalities partnering and actually channeling funding to private entities, and there's these partnerships. And there have been examples of that happening in Vermont too, over the years. And one of the biggest assets that Vermont has is the solid waste districts. A lot of states don't even have that, and so you actually have people whose jobs are dedicated to this topic. And so it's like, that is definitely a leverage point. And there's an institution there that can sort of capitalize on it. So, I think it's like, to Ben's point, like, I think that other states are also aware of that, the challenge of getting money to folks who want to compost but aren't a municipality, and that's one of the ways they've done it. So I think that's a really good point to end on. Well, thank you all. This was interesting for me. And I'm excited to carry on the conversation today and have lunch with you all. All right.